there are different ways that you can graph a piecewise function. So sometimes people like to graph all three pieces and then go back and erase the parts they don't need or things like that. The easiest way I have ever learned to graph one of these would be to just make like a little table for each of the three pieces or however many pieces you have. We have 3, I think, in each of these examples. Okay, first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to use these little inequalities. And I'm just going to draw a vertical line at the numbers I see in the inequalities because this is where we're going to switch between the pieces. So I'm just going to make a little vertical line at -3, and I'm going to make a little vertical line at 4. So this is where we'll switch from one piece to the other, just so I know. They should not overlap because these are all going to be functions. So if one piece goes kind of overlaps the other when you're graphing these, you've done something wrong. It should be just like one piece in each area of that graph. They should not overlap. They should not. It's possible that they would run into each other at where they switch, but for the ones that we're going to do today, I don't think any of them connect. Okay, I'm just going to start with the first piece. Now, I'm going to make a tiny little table. And I'm going to write x, but instead of writing y, like an xy little t-table, instead of writing y, I'm actually going to write what the piece is. Because the first piece is x plus 2. That's what I'm going to do to x to figure out the corresponding y value. All right? Now, you're just going to start your table, whatever number is in that lovely inequality. So this says this is for x values less than -3. So I know I'm not going to actually touch -3, but you want to start with that. And then I usually just make myself a little note, is it's for x values less than -3, that would actually be like an open circle on the graph. Now, all you have to do is think of a number, preferably that would be on the window of that graph that we've got on the paper. What is the number that is less than -3? Just any number less than -3. Smaller than -3. -4, perfect. Like, you just gotta go left side of this. Okay, like maybe -4, I don't know, -5. Really, you're only gonna need 2 points because we're just gonna play connect the dots. Okay, so I'm just gonna literally plug the x value in. So if I do like -3 plus 2 would be -1. -4, I'm plugging this value in for x. So -4 plus 2 would be -2. If I want to keep going, -5 plus 2 would be -3. And I'm literally just going to go, I only picked x values that were smaller than -3, so this should go the correct direction. So at -3, I'm going to have a little open circle because I don't actually touch this point, but I want to see where it connects up with the vertical line where we're going to switch pieces. And then -4, -2. -5, -3, and we're just going to make a ray because we're only using this piece to the left side of the x value -3. So it's just going to be like a little ray. That's my first piece. Just play connect the dots. But you want to make sure, start with the value that's in the inequality because it should actually connect up to that area. We'll just have an open circle. All right, if you got an in-between, the second piece here, these are my favorite to graph because I'm just going to have my x values and I'm not even going to have to plug anything in. If it's just 6, it's just going to be a nice horizontal line at 6. So any y coordinates I write down here are just going to be 6. We won't plug anything in. I'm just defining this so you can see I'm using the second piece. Now, if you got a middle piece, you are just going to use the 2 numbers that are in this inequality. So we're going to start up at -3. And we're going to stop at +4. Now, at -3, because it's x is greater than or equal to -3, it's going to have a filled-in circle. And at the 4, it's x is less than 4, so that'll have an open circle. You don't have to draw that on your table. I usually just do that to help myself remember. And then we're just going to play connect the dots with these 2 points. So both of these are just going to be 6. This should just be a horizontal line across between the 2. So -3 up at 6, I'm going to have a filled-in circle. And over at 4, we're going to have an open circle. And all these numbers in between, they would all have a y coordinate of 6. So I'm just literally playing connect the dots. That's my second piece. That is 6 for all the x values between -3 and 4. All right. And then my third piece, we'll do a little strategy here. All right, so my third piece is -1/2 x minus 2. So I'm going to have to multiply all my x coordinates by -1/2, so keep that in mind. And I'm going to start that one up at 4, and it's going to be a filled in circle for x values greater than or equal to 4. Greater than goes to the right, so then I want to think of a number, like just numbers bigger than 4. Okay, but keep in mind, my slope is -1/2, so whatever I plug in for x, I'm going to have to multiply by -1/2. So what would maybe be a number that I would pick to put in the table that would be bigger than 4? Jenny, what do you think? Like 6 or 8. Okay, now the reason for that, you just don't have to mess around with the decimal. That way, if I plug in 5, we're going to get like a 0.5 as our y value. So just use even numbers. If my denominator of my slope was 3, I would pick numbers divisible by 3. If my denominator was like 5, pick numbers divisible by 5. So if it's 2, just pick numbers that are divisible by 2. Okay, now on this one, just to show you guys this real quick, this is an option for any of them, but the first two pieces were kind of easy. So I'm just going to show you real quick. If you want to use this as an option, you don't have to. You could just do it by hand as well. But if you go in the upper left corner of your lovely graphing calculator, let me see if I can get this on the screen a little bit better. Just that y equals button. And I have something in there from earlier. But I'm just going to put negative under the 3. And then 1/2, I'm just going to type 0.5. Your x button, remember, is right next to the alpha button there if you want to use the variable. And then, so I have -1/2. Make sure you use the negative key. The calculator will get mad at you if you don't. And then I'm subtracting 2. So don't use the negative key. Make sure you use the subtraction key. You guys can hopefully see on there, like the negative key is a little bit smaller and just a little bit higher up on the line, whereas the subtraction sign is going to be more in the middle and a little bit longer. And then you can type the 2. So I just did y equals. And then if you want, just hit second, and then the graph button will give you the table. So I just hit, after I type that into y equals, I just hit second graph. And then if you want, you can scroll up and down here. So like, I'm just going to jot these down. So at 4, let me move this over here. At 4, you can see -4. And you guys can see if we plugged in an odd number, we'd have a 0.5 on that table. At 6, you're at -5. At 8, you're at -6. So you can use that if you want to. To get out of that screen, just hit second, and the button right next to it says quit. If you hit second, quit, that'll just take you back to the main screen. But if you want to do that instead of hand plugging it in when you make the table, you make use of your calculator if you would like. I'm going to go ahead and plot these points. These should only go to the right. So like at 4, -4, I'm going to have a filled in circle. Make sure you go over to the 6, you're at -5. At 8, you're at -6. And you're just going to make a ray. It should only go to the right. Otherwise, the pieces would overlap and it wouldn't be a function. So you should have a distinct piece between on each of the different areas of the domain. They should not overlap. Is anybody having a question? Okay, let's just try one more here. All right, so the very first thing, and you don't have to do this, but I like to do this so I know where my pieces should switch. I should switch at -2 and +3. So I'm just going to draw a little vertical line at -2 and +3. And again, I should have a distinct piece between each of these lovely areas of the graph. And I'm just going to make a tiny table for each one. So the first piece is -x, so the opposite of my x value, -4. And I'm using that for x values less than -2. So start with the number and the inequality. Start with the -2. And then if you're not sure, look on the graph, okay? Less than goes to the left. So if I'm picking numbers less than -2, it'd be like -3, -4, -5, just to the left of that if you're not sure. My slope is just -1, so I don't have to worry about what x values I'm plugging in. If I want to use my little resources a little bit, I just do -x -4, hit second table, and just scroll up and down on the x's. So at -2, you're at -2. At -3, you're at -1. And at -4, you're at 0. And if you wanted to write more points, you could have more points. You just need 2 if you're writing, or if you're graphing a line. Oops, I forgot to write down. I should have an open circle at the -2 because it's just x is less than -2. So -2, -2, little open circle. -3, -1, -4, 0. And we're just going to make a ray just going to the left. That first piece should go to the left. The middle piece is in between, and the third piece should go to the right. Okay, if you got a middle piece, I would just plug in, we're doing 2x plus 1 for this middle piece. Just use the 2 numbers in the inequality. So it's x is greater than or equal to -2, but less than or equal to 3. So I just plug in the 2 ends of that. Both of these guys will be closed circles, and we're just going to play connect the dots. Now, if let me just plug these in. If I did like 2 times -2, that would be -4 plus 1. This would be -3. You do by hand or do it with the calculator. It's up to you. If I plug in 3, we'd have 6 plus 1, so this would be 7. So I'm going to have a closed circle at -2, -3, just below the one we just graphed. And a closed circle over 3 up 7. And this should just be in between those 2 vertical lines because it's just for those x values between -2 and 3. We're using this piece. So we're just going to play, sorry, these are kind of far away from each other, but we're just going to play connect the dots here. If you want to put more points in between there, you are welcome to, but really you just need those 2 points to play connect the dots and get the graph of that line. Now, the third piece, my favorite, because it's just a horizontal line. So just for x values that are bigger than 3, so I would start at 3 and maybe, like, just think of a number bigger than 3, so like maybe 4, maybe 5. If it's just -3, y equals -3, it's just a nice horizontal line, so literally all the y coordinates for the rest of the graph, there's nothing to plug in. It would just be -3. You just make sure you start that up with an open circle because you would have just x is greater than 3, so it should be an open circle where it connects to this domain line here. We'll open circle here, and then it should just go to the right. The pieces should not overlap. The first piece should go to the left, the middle piece in between, and the third piece should go to the right. Is anybody having a question? Okay. Now, I'm going to have you guys do one more here. This one has a quadratic in it, and do me a favor, I totally screwed this up. Change this so it says 4. I don't know why. I had a 2. Just change that so it says 4 for me. Okay. Now, my first piece. Now, you can hand plug this in, right? But I would definitely, on this one, I would just use my calculator. So the first piece is quadratic. You have -x squared minus 6x minus 4. You might need more than just a couple points to kind of get the feel of what that'll look like. And let me come over here. I'm going to draw a vertical line at -1. And then I screwed up. Make sure you draw the other vertical line at 4. So those will be where I switch pieces. Now, for the quadratic, that's the first one, it's to the left of -1. So you start with the boundary number. This will be an open circle because it's just less than. And then less than -1, be like -2, -3, -4. I'm going to grab my calculator. You can plug these in by hand, of course. But I'm going to do this with the calculator and make it go a little faster. Now, when you type the -x squared, you have to use the negative key under the 3. So -x and then the squared button, and then do the subtraction key, -6x, subtraction key, -4. And then once you got it typed into your y equals, just hit second graph, and that'll take you to the table. And you can scroll up and down on these x's. So -1 should be 1, -2 should be 4, -3 should be 5, Negative 4 should be 4. And I'm going to write one more down here. Negative 5 should be 1. Can you guys tell from looking at the table what the vertex of that parabola would be? Do you guys see how there's kind of like a little pattern around? So this has to be in the middle, because then it's like a mirror image, 4 and 4, 1 and 1. So that negative 3, 5 is going to end up being the vertex of that parabola. So when you graph this, it should be a U shape. So negative 1, 1 will have an open circle. All the rest of these we can make closed circles. So negative 2, you're going to be up at 4. Negative 3, 5 should be the vertex. And then I'm just going to kind of go down a couple points on the other side so you guys can kind of see the U shape. So it should be negative 4, 4, and negative 5, 1. And hopefully just kind of, when you connect it, just do your best to make a U shape since we know this is a parabola. And then I'm going to draw my arrow only pointed to the left. Not bad to do, just use your calculator to help you. It'll make it go so much faster. Okay, now my second piece is 2x plus 1, and I screwed up, so make sure you change those little numbers. We're going to use negative 1 and 4. Both of these guys are going to be closed circles. And you can plug it in by hand, or you can do it on the calculator, whatever's easier. I'm just going to do it by hand real quick. If I plug in negative 1, 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Plus 1, this would be negative 1. And if I plug in 4, 2 times 4 is 8, plus 1 is 9. So that's going to be really close to the top of the graph. So negative 1, 1, closed up circle, and 4, 9. It'll be like way at the top. And then just connect the dots because you're representing all the x values in between 1 and 4 when you draw that piece. Notice there's no overlap, like it's just between those two boundary lines. And then again, this is my favorite, when it's just a horizontal line, there's nothing for me to do. But when my x values are 4 and bigger, so like maybe 4, 5, 6, whatever, the y coordinate is just negative 5. There's nothing for you to actually plug in, it's just negative 5. It'll be a horizontal line for the rest of the graph. Just make sure you have an open circle at the 4 because it's just strictly for x values, just plain greater than 4. So I'm going to come down here, 4, negative 5, little open circle, and then it should just be pointed to the right. For the rest of the graph, you're going to be on negative 5. Is anybody having a question? Okay, now, I had you guys evaluate a little bit in our last lesson, but they had a graph. So this example 2 down here, I'm just going to give you the equation of the piecewise function. So I don't have a graph. We could make a graph, but I didn't really put a graph on here for us to do that. So I want to see if you can evaluate if I just give you the piecewise equation. So it's got 3 parts to it. This says g of x, and then it gives you the 3 pieces. So the first piece is for x values less than or equal to 1. The second piece is for x values between 1 and 3. And the third piece is for x values greater than or equal to 3. If you guys remember from our last lesson, if we're going to evaluate these, whatever it tells you inside the parentheses, this is your x value. And you want to tell me the corresponding y value. So if I tell you my x value is 10, and I'm going to use this piecewise function, which piece would 10 go with? Like the first one, the second one, or the third one? Which piece would you use? The third one, right? Okay, 10 is a number that is greater than or equal to 3. So once you know, just literally plug in that number to that piece, but make sure you pick the right piece. So any number 3 or bigger, we're going to use that third piece. So if I'm using 10, this is going to end up being 6 minus 20, so the corresponding y value there should be negative 14. All right, which piece would you use if I told you the x value was 2? The second one. Now, this is awesome because that's just a horizontal line, so you don't have to do anything there. It should just be negative 10. All right, which piece would you plug negative 4 into? The first one. Okay, now be real careful with this. Whenever you're working with an absolute value, I feel like some people see absolute value and they just make everything positive. It doesn't work like that. So if I plug in -4 for x, inside my absolute value, I would have -4 plus 1. Absolute values work like parentheses or grouping symbols. You can't take the absolute value till you get it down to one number. So I'm just going to actually add these guys together first. Don't just be like, oh, I'm going to change that to +4. You'll get the wrong answer. So -4 plus 1 would leave you with -3 in the absolute value, and then you take the absolute value after you get that down to one number. So absolute value makes everything positive. If it's already positive, it stays positive. In that case, it's going to make that -3 turn into a +3. So answer there would be 6. And then this is tricky. Which piece would you plug 3 into? The last one, because or equal to, so it has to be the last one. So this would be 6 minus 2 times 3, which is actually 6 minus 6. So this last piece would be 0. Okay, is anybody having a question? All right, let me have you guys look at the bottom here. Now, there are actually, this is kind of a little bit of a review and a little bit new. I have 3 different ways to represent a function down here. So f of x is literally just an equation. And we've done stuff with that before, so I think that one won't be bad. We have not done any like this that I can remember. So g of x here is this table. So this whole thing is my g of x function. They just give you some points on a table. And then h of x is going to be this lovely graph. Okay, so 3 different functions here. So I'm going to start with the table. So we haven't done a question like this. This says find g of 10. Can anybody raise your hand, tell me, like, what would g of 10 be from the table? Jake, what do you think? Yes, okay. This is your x value. You literally just go to the corresponding, they call it g of x in the table. It'd be like your y value, so this would just be -17. So like if it says 2, that's my x value, matched up with that in the table would be -5. If I do 8, matched up with that in the table, this one's a little bit of review of an operation. We're going to subtract 2 things here. So g of 8 is -14. Now, I'm going to subtract from that. This is very tricky. So h is the graph, all right? And my graph actually only goes over to -7, but it wants to know what h of -10 would be. So if the graph went over a little bit further, could you guys tell what h of -10 would be from the graph? It'd be 4. Yeah, this would just keep going forever. It's just pointed that way. So that's on 4, so this would be 4. Subtract those 2 guys. So my answer for that would be -18. Now, if you do division, I just want to remind you this really means f of 4 divided by g of 4. Okay, I'm just going to pick g of 4 out of the table real quick. So if my x value is 4, the corresponding y value is -8, that would go on the bottom of the fraction. For f, I'd have to do like a little bit of work there, and so my f of x function is actually that equation. So I'm just going to plug in a 4 everywhere I see an x. We haven't done this for a couple days, so just be -2 times 4 plus 5. -3 would go on the top of that. So that's just an evaluate if you have an actual function. The only other thing you could do there is those 2 negatives would cancel out, so that would actually be +3/8 as your answer there. Okay, tiny review of composition a little bit here. Now, this is f composed with h of -6, that little open circle. This is the same thing as f of h of -6, if you like that parenthesis notation better. If you got the little open circle composition, whatever's closer goes first. If you like the inside out way, we're going to do h of -6 first. So if you guys are looking at the graph, h of -6, this over here, that's actually going to be 4. Once you have that, this is 2 problems in 1, then I'm going to do f of the result, which was 4. Now, the f of x, back to that little equation there, so be -2 times 4, and I feel like we just did this, so that's -3, but that second part to that answer when you're doing composition is the answer to the entire question. All right. Now, this last one here is also composition. So I'm going to do f of 3/2 first. So if I want to, I'm just going to plug that in to my little function, 3 over 2 plus 5. This is going to end up being 2. Then with the composition, you take your answer and you're going to plug in 2 to the g function. Now g happens to be the table, and 2 goes with -5. So that's my lovely answer there. Okay. And then I'm just going to go ahead and, we kind of went over this on the homework, so I'm going to skip these guys at the bottom. That's just working backwards. That's me giving you the y value and you doing the x. Don't worry about those. Is anybody having a question?